So having given you all that's coming, I'm going to go back to Mary now and let her share with us the second half of her presentation.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Let me share my screen. So I really appreciate being able to share my experiences. For those that, as a review, if you hadn't been at the last Tutors talk, I've been tutoring only for a couple of years. My experience is in business. I'm not an educator. So I have had I come from tutoring from a different way, and in the last presentation, I talked about small talk, and in this kind of part two. This is to share my experiences in teaching or practicing conversation with my students. This came about as part of kind of a goal planning process with my students about how to converse. When we started planning, we tried to come up with a list of topics. Some of them were more in the lines of small talk. Others were more complex topics that lend themselves better to conversation. Can you see the screen? Is the screen okay? I want to just make sure everybody.
Yes.
Okay. So, this talk is about how we approached and the process that we went through for planning, preparing, and then actually conducting conversations. Unlike small talk, which I talked about last time, which is polite and informal exchanges about unimportant things, traffic, weather, what you did this weekend. Conversation is a little bit more complex. It's an informal exchange where people are talking about sentiments, impressions, observations, ideas. What we also try to do is use it as a way to share culture, interests, and hobbies. And one of my goals as part of the conversation to be an equal player in the conversation and talk about American culture and American experiences in an informal way that was not pedagogical, but more just another person in the conversation that had something to share with people. We also used internet resources. My class is on Zoom, so we used internet sources as a way to enhance the dialogue and just keep the conversation flowing. I think we all have experience in conversing with students we probably do this in our classes. You talk about what you did the week before. You maybe you have a conversation about what's in the current news. But these conversations were a little bit more of a project. And I have to apologize, across the street, they are pruning a tree. And so if you hear noise in the background, there's nothing I can do about it. They're over there with their chainsaws. So we actually decided to make a little bit of a project out of it. We chose topics. We prepared for the conversation, so we didn't have the conversation the day we chose the topics. And it made for a fun, interesting, and challenging way to have a conversation. It was a break from the usual lesson format. What I'm going to show takes some planning and preparation. It was a project, if you will, a mini project. So the first thing we did was in planning, was to choose a topic. So it was something that everybody could share. A favorite artist, a favorite song, something about homeland, food, or an important city or site, a traditional holiday meal or custom, a movie or the movies, a favorite hobby, a book, a short story, a folk tale or a poem, or famous architecture. We didn't draw constraints around, well, only talk about your homeland, other than the homeland topic. But it was just it was to share, the experience and the interests of each one of us. So then we set a due date. It took a couple of weeks generally to get ready. So what we did is once we identified the topic, each of us selected one or more favorite items from that topic to share. We used tools to share our selections. YouTube was a great source, museums, educational sites, libraries, Wikipedia. One thing I did want to say is language was not a barrier. My students used the internet in their own native language, but Google will translate a site. So I want to share this. We were talking about architecture, and they sent this to me about a particular building in Europe, and I thought, oh my gosh, it's in Spanish. What am I going to do? It's going to take me forever to figure this out. But it was very simple to just have Google Translate. So there was no issue, there was no constraints around what they had to do or how they had to communicate to me. The internet took care of it. Everyone shared their selections in advance of the lesson. So this might, I'm going to put this over here, I don't know whether, this might be through email or text if your students communicate with each other, or you might have them pull it in to just send it to you, and then you communicate it out to all the students. I consolidated this into a lesson plan or a document for presentation and for working during the conversation class, just to make it easier, and so that we had all the links and we had all the topics right there, and we weren't struggling during the conversation. Allow enough time for preparation. As I said, this takes some thought, and this assumes that students have some access to the internet, but give them time and give yourself time to prepare it. And then allow enough time for the conversation, because this approach is a little bit different in that it's not going to be 30 minutes, 20 minutes. In some of these instances, we took more than one lesson to do this. If you have questions, just let me know as we go through this. And then, of course, rules of engagement, which I talked about in the last presentation too. You need to establish trust in a safe space. So this might be something you do with your class once they get to know each other and they're comfortable sharing. Be sensitive to cultural and gender differences. I didn't have this issue in my class, but I know other tutors have mentioned during other tutors' talks, subtleties in the way different cultures handle things, and it might be easy to offend or make people uncomfortable. And also let the students have the final say in the topics. I mean, everybody has to agree that they're comfortable and they have an interest in it. And set goals and expectations and boundaries. I mean, it should be a productive conversation. Nobody should be feel that they're on the spot or that they're under pressure. And I have some examples to give you to go through that'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about. And again, I didn't have to do this with my class, but I was thinking in a class where you have people from different cultures, it might be a good idea ahead of the communication to just talk about cultural differences in conversation. I found a very interesting site. It's, I think it's Australian, but they have, it's called Cultural Atlas. I don't know if anybody's seen it before, but they have sections on countries from all over the world. And I was looking at American culture communication, and I thought it was very interesting. This comes from Australia, so it's third party, it's their observations of us. But, we're direct communicators, we're very straightforward, we're generally comfortable asking questions, we're informal, we're enthusiastic, assertive, and confident. We may be more comfortable with voicing competing views. We do speak at higher volumes, things like that. It might be useful to review differences in conversations so that people understand as you're progressing through the conversation how different people are responding. So let me give you some examples. I think I've got 3 here. The first one is a conversation about music. So we decided we wanted to talk about our musical interests. And each participant recommended, we have a small class, so I think each of us recommended 3 songs or piece of music that we wanted to share. And we shared YouTube links in advance of the class. We listened to the music in advance and just thought about the music and what we might want to share during the conversation. I provided some links to words that might be used to describe music, just to give us a little bit of something to start with. And then during the class, I played part of each song, and the selector didn't have to, we're not putting people on the spot, but they explained why they chose the music, and then we shared impressions of the music. It was really interesting and fun. They selected, for example, a piece of music that they had listened to from their own native country, but when they moved to this country. And it evoked a lot of emotion in them. They talked about their experiences when they first arrived here, listening to that song and what it meant to them. I tried to share some music that is iconic in American culture that they may not have been familiar with. So some were a hit and some were not. Brad Paisley and country music, they liked a lot. Broadway, not so much. But we had a good conversation, and I learned a lot about South American music and some European groups that I didn't know about. So it was a good way to just to share culture, not just about their country, but just interests in general. The next one was a conversation about art. Same thing. Each participant recommended 1 or more pieces of art and shared the link in advance of the class. I compiled everything together, and then during the class, I shared the artwork. They explained why they chose the artwork, and then we shared the impressions. Just to give you an idea of what we did. So this, the upper left, the dolly, they actually chose. And I chose Norman Rockwell, thinking not necessarily high art, but it's very iconic. And it's an interesting, the history of Norman Rockwell is interesting as well. Both of these generated a ton of, a lot of conversation, about Salvador Dali, about the impressions, about the concept of time. I mean, it just went off on a tremendous, a really good dialogue and exchange of ideas. And for Norman Rockwell, surprisingly, this generated a lot of conversation too, a lot of empathy, discussion about what the story is behind this, subtle observations about the characters and the way they're presented. And we had a good conversation with that as well. Again, you might need more than one session to finish the conversations. We didn't try to rush it. We went at everyone's speed that was comfortable some pictures, some paintings took more time than others. The third one that I wanted to share was a conversation about movies. So we did this a little bit differently. The first thing we did was discussed our movies experiences. I went online and Googled movie questions and came up with a list. Whoops, wait a minute. A list of questions. You might have seen these before. This comes from a podcast. I think it's Films to be Buried With, which I've never watched. I've never listened to the podcast, but these were questions that we just used to start a conversation. We didn't necessarily go through all of them. Some we skipped, but it was a really, really interesting way to get people talking and to move the conversation along if it faltered at one time or another. So that was our first lesson. And then we agreed on a movie to watch. So we had a discussion about it. We were comfortable, we were careful to choose a movie that everybody was comfortable with. There was a proposal to watch a horror movie, as an example. I said, no, I don't watch horror movies, so I'll do another option. Then in terms of preparation, everybody watched the movie on their own time. And then then we came together in our conversation class and we had a free-flowing conversation generated by the film. What we watched and chose was King Richard. The students watched it in their native language. There was no pressure to try to understand it in English. And then it prompted a really wide-ranging conversation about the movie itself, the actors and their performances. We went off into a conversation about the Deep South, about different parenting styles.
Okay.
And then there was a scene that they had a question about where they used the idiom crossing the line. That took a little bit of digging. I couldn't remember the scene, so I think we went to YouTube and finally found the scene so that we could discuss it. But again, it was a good way to just have an informal conversation and share impressions, a little bit of history of the U.S. The other thing with movies, I did talk a little bit about the McCarthy era. So I took an opportunity to talk a little bit of background about American social history. So at any rate, that was all I had to share. But it's a way, what we have found is it's a way to kind of structure a conversation that might be a little bit more substantive than what you might have in just an everyday class.
Mary Nell,
Yes.
when they watched the movie, did they do English closed captioning?
I think they did, actually. That's a good point. Thank you, Sheila. Yeah, they did. But I didn't, we didn't talk about constraints or restrictions and how they wanted to watch the film. Yeah.
I have a question for you, and maybe you could give some suggestions based on your experience with this. I was very interested in your first presentation on small talk.
Yes.
And I did a little PowerPoint about it for my students, and I asked them what their impressions of American conversation and small talk. And two of them said, well, we're like that too. We just talk to everybody.
Yeah.
And the third one said, well, no, we're in Ukraine, we're very private.
Yes.
We don't talk to other people, strangers, about personal things. And this is the one that I'm trying to converse more with. And I know her family. I know her husband. I know her son. They've been to our house. And from time to time, we have personal conversations. But she has barriers.
Yeah.
And she wants a lesson. And sometimes I can tell when I ask, how was your weekend? How's Mark? That she doesn't really want to go there. She wants to spend the 45 minutes getting some grammar and be done. And as a result, we're not chatting.
Mm.
We should. Have you run into cultural barriers like that? And any suggestions?
I have not. It's interesting you say that because what I have read is that, for example, Scandinavian countries are the same way. They don't talk small talk. I've heard. I was reading something recently where I think it was a Canadian that lived in Norway for a while, and he said he lived in the same building for years, and he said when he passed people in the hall, they would not say hello. So I don't, I think it's just something, I don't know. My opinion is it's something that the person will need to begin to get comfortable with over time. But the other thing that comes to mind is maybe talk about ways to respond to an attempt to small talk that isn't exposing the person. I'm just thinking there may be responses that that person could, your student could give that would not be sharing a lot of information. Oh, we had a great time over the weekend. Thank you for asking, and
Mhm.
just shut it down because I mean even some of us are hesitant to talk about personal information.
Mhm.
Right.
But the other thing that comes to mind is maybe then an objective conversation about something that doesn't share personal information might be a way to have conversation.
Maybe something of professional interest to her. I mean,
Yeah,
I know
yeah,
the
Mhm.
business they're in.
yeah.
Mhm.
Or talk about food or something like that. Something that isn't gonna require that she expose her own feelings. Yeah, interesting.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
I was wondering if John's student just has general difficulty expressing himself or herself verbally. Is that the case? So maybe that's why they're hesitant to talk.
And so, what was the first part?
I wonder if that person has difficulty just talking. I mean,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
English.
she does. I mean, she has trouble with verb tenses.
Well, in that case, she does need the grammar. And I find that something like I use side by side, I'm not pushing it, but they have like sentence responses and all they have to respond in one sentence. And it's a pattern. And so at the end of each lesson, each practice, they have an open-ended question. So it gives the opportunity to say something verbally in small bites, basically.
Mhm.
So maybe that's because every student has different needs and that, and maybe she does need the grammar and she does feel uncomfortable and she may be a perfectionist that she says she won't say anything unless she knows it's perfect. And they have to overcome that, of course. But
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's good. Yeah, I know she tends to cheat and use verb tenses that are easy, avoid the simple past because of all the irregulars. Uh, and there's some cultural issues too. I mean, I think that there are bad things going on in
Mm-hmm.
her life. Her mother lives in Odessa, and there are missiles landing there.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
and I think she's also resistant to my culture, your culture stuff because we tend to boost our
Yeah,
culture, and I think she's got a lot of pride
yeah.
in her own. So I've tried to learn to be careful about all that. But when all is said and done, I want to talk some more.
Sheila, you had a question?
Yeah, just a couple of comments. My student that I have now is very shy. And Mary Nell, that was very helpful talking about Americans and how we communicate. She's Japanese, and she said in Japan, people don't ask each other their opinions.
Mhm.
So when something comes up and it's a question about her opinion, it's like torture to her. It's torture. So I try to keep it where it's more safe. And the other thing is to, Lainey got us news for you. And John, this may be a good thing also. She picks the article that we're going to discuss, the newspaper article, ahead of time. And then we, during our session, she reads it. We go over pronunciation, we go over grammar, and then we can talk about the article. And she doesn't pick anything that's controversial. And right now, Ukraine, Russia, very sensitive subject. And I can understand, that it's hard for her to open up really about anything right now, because I'm sure she's in a lot of pain. So that may be another way to do it. It's sort of what Mary Nell is doing, but I do it with News for You.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, just I'm thinking, John, maybe ask her, is there something that, tell her that you would like to have a conversation and ask her if there's something she would like to talk about. Yeah.
Rainey, you had a question?
Mary Neal, what level is your students?
I think, they started as high beginners, low intermediate. I would say they're probably intermediate now. Yeah.
Mary Nell, how do
Yes.
you, when the conversation starts flowing and you hear mistakes, or you hear an awkward way of phrasing something when there's an easier way, do you interrupt or do you just let it flow?
In a conversation where the point is, my thought with conversation is part of it is you're trying to gain confidence, right? And so I do not interrupt unless they stop and they ask, and sometimes they will. Did I say that right? Should I say it differently? But no, I don't. So I'll take a note about what they might have aired or what might need improvement. And then I'll try to do a future lesson around it. I won't even do it in the same lesson because I don't want them to feel self-conscious about what they've said. That's the way I do it.
Thank you.
I really like the idea, Mary Nell, that you share something ahead of time and you know about it and they know about it. So everybody has a common ground on which they can, if you're an obsessive person, you could check your vocabulary about music or art or whatever.
Yeah.
So that for some people who feel less confidence, they could prepare in a way that would help them.
Yeah. Yeah. It gives everybody time to think about it. Even me.
I'm lucky. I have a group that's pretty experienced in English, but one of the things we do say periodically is when you go to a cocktail party or Starbucks or something, what are the two topics that you shouldn't discuss?
Yes.
And politics and religion.
Yeah.
So we kind of avoid those two unless, there's there's a reason, and sometimes there is, but we don't get. There was only one class I've got students from Korea and Japan, and if you know your history going back, there's bad feelings there. And one of the Korean students got very offended by something that was said historically, and that's the only time that's ever happened, but it did happen one time. So
yeah, I think in the small talk presentation we talked about, I mentioned that one of the rules of the road is don't talk about religion, don't talk about Generally, you don't ask people their ages,
Yeah.
things like that.
The other thing you were mentioning about words and things, and I always tell them how sometimes English is crazy because words are spelled a certain way that look a certain way with alphabetical, but they're not pronounced that way. And
Yeah.
when we do a reading, sometimes that gets confusing. And the other thing somebody mentioned about interrupting, and I do interrupt if they're reading and they make a pronunciation or they something that's not, it's usually pronunciation that's not correct. And then we go over it again, but it's not a critical thing. It's like, oh, that's how you do it. I mean, they want to know how to pronounce these words correctly. So,
Brian, you had some comments?
Yes. Yeah, another thanks, Marinelle. It's really helpful, your presentation. And some of my classes, they're maybe intermediate, advanced intermediate, and they actually sometimes prefer, and I prefer, to spring a conversation topic on them more suddenly. And because many of the students, they're very conscientious, and when you give them a topic, some of my students write a paragraph, and then in the class they will read that paragraph. And when they don't have the topic in advance, one thing we did recently was describe your first job, or what was life like during your elementary school years in your country. I don't know. There's thousands of things, but anyway, then they have to speak kind of spontaneously, I guess, and it's just another. I mean, there are many different ways to approach it, and many good ways. So I just wanted to offer that. A couple of my classes prefer that method too. So.
No, that's a good point. We have decided that they wanted to have uh, the first half hour of any class to be conversation. And it's just sort of free flowing on whatever. And then we get into the actual lesson. And we had to limit our conversation because we were just kind of drifting into, like 45 minutes, an hour later, and we haven't even started the lesson yet. So we decided half an hour. But what I presented today was almost like, okay, you have your normal conversation, and now we're going to have our assigned conversation. So it's just a different way to deal with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was really struck as I listened to everyone how really well the essential thing that we all need to do is to be able to make people comfortable and to intuit, what is it? Could be, what's the barrier that might be there that's keeping them from talking?
Yeah.
And they named a number of things today. That's really been helpful.
I can say something. Marinelle, I think your ideas are super good. I have a conversation only class, 3 ladies, and they're probably high intermediate at the least. And we just talk randomly about what happened during the week, but I love your idea and I'm going to present it to them to have something specific, and we'll see if they have time to prepare for it. But another thing they love to do is travel, so that could be another, they love to travel, they love to camp, stuff like that, so that could be another conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a lot of beginners, so conversation can be a little stilted.
Yeah.
It gets to be more like the one-liner, one-word answer kind of thing.
Yeah.
But still, you can use the same concept, use the subject, and then just talk at a more elementary level.
I have a conversation class, and what's interesting is during the class, it's free flowing and confident and no problems. And then between classes, I'll say, okay, since the last class, give an example of when you used your English. And where do you think the number one place that everybody seems to use English, maybe at least once a week in Los Angeles?
Probably Starbucks or McDonald's or something like
Trader
that.
Joe's.
Yeah, yeah.
Because in Trader Joe's, those salespeople actually approach sometimes or at the cash register and they'll ask a couple questions and that gets them talking. But other than that, they don't engage that much. I mean, they just one word answers or yes, thank you, goodbye. So I'm trying to get them to talk a little bit more.
That is an issue or a challenge that my students have expressed, that it's hard for them to practice their English. I mean, they both work, and so they're both speaking English at work, I think, now. But that one of their goals is to have more English-speaking friends, and that's hard to do. Somebody talked about setting up a conversation class, and I think that would be a great idea, where students might have an opportunity from different tutors, have an opportunity to get together and converse. I suggested that they maybe participate in the Torrance conversation class, and they didn't think they were good enough to do that, so they're afraid to. Maybe if we offered it,
Yeah.
they'd
Can
have.
I ask you a question? I came to the meeting late. Are we talking about ESL classes, not LES? Are these all ESL students?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
What I find is, again, my class is a mixture of Korean and Japanese, but what I find is at the beginning, nobody knows each other. And then they start making friends. And then they say, let's go to Starbucks or someplace. And they go and they speak English the whole time, of course.
Wonderful.
And that's a chance.
Good.
To do it.
You could use this with LES students, Maura. You could have a conversation, write it out, and look at the words and the structure of the sentence and all of this, how you pronounce the words and all that stuff.
Well, unfortunately, my LES student graduated, Claudia. She finished all the class, and I kept hoping for another student, and it looks like there isn't one available right now.
Right. Yeah.
For the LES.
Joanne, you've had your hand up for a while.
Okay. Well, I have my students are a little bit lower level than Marianelle's, probably because I don't think that they can handle the architecture or the music.
Yeah.
But the movie one sounds interesting. But I was wondering, I guess for everyone to see the same movie, you have to find out like if they all have Netflix or they'll have something like that, right?
A good point, but also the library has movies available that you can stream. So if they have a computer and they have internet service, they can get a library card. I think I know Palos Verdes Library and LA County Library have movies available. Not all of them, so you're a little bit more limited, but quite a few.
Or even a TV show.
Or even a TV show, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I have. So I was inspired by your last talk about practical topics, small talk topics. So I kind of like incorporate that in my lessons, and so I went to this site called eslfast.com. It has various conversations, mostly at the low and maybe slightly lower intermediate level. And so I assigned them as homework, one conversation about health or something. And then the next time we will go back and I will have them read the conversation, taking the parts. And we would talk about, things in the conversation. What does this word mean? And, how would you say it? And some of the conversations were interesting that morphed into a conversation for my whole hour practically.
Yeah.
I have time to go to the grammar.
Yeah.
So this is something that lower levels maybe find helpful because the conversations are pretty easy.
Honestly, going to get this done right now and get moving on. That's what.
And I think I don't know if it was clear, but the progression with my class was from the small talk to the larger conversation. So we started with small talk and just gained confidence in that, and then moved into the conversation topics that we talked about today.
Joanne, could you provide the link to that
Just
to me? You just send it to SBLC office.
Yeah.
Okay, you put it in the chat
or the chat. Yeah.
Like what they said to her. That's what I think. But I think
I'm thinking too, even if students aren't at a really high level, everybody's smart in their own language, and you get stupid when you're trying to speak a language that isn't your own. I know that happens to me. You're talking baby talk, but something like architecture or art, they're going to have ideas about that, even if they can't express it. So maybe do it a little bit differently. Just not have a conversation, but bring a piece of art or bring a piece of architecture, and then maybe you're learning nouns or verbs or adjectives, something in a very basic way. Use it as a tool. So they get an opportunity to share their own interests, but it's not going to be conversation. It's going to be more about this is big, this is small, this is pretty, something like that.
Sheila, you have your hand up.
Yeah, first of all, everybody probably should mute if they're not talking. There's a conversation going on in the background, and somebody's. I wanted to say that
and I feel my feeling.
I think that's Lynn. I don't, Lainey, could you can mute her, I think.
Whatever nuances, whatever's going on. I don't know about it. It's your decision.
Just go to her box, and I think if you click on her box, you can mute her. Yeah,
Thank you.
There you go.
Okay, anyway, so from what Jim was saying, yes, I give my student homework because she's so hesitant to speak English outside of our sessions. So I give her an assignment to speak English to at least one person, maybe at her kid's soccer game or somewhere else. Unfortunately, a couple of weeks ago, she decided she was going to try to make conversation with the kids' crossing guard. And the crossing guard didn't understand her and laughed at her. And that set her back a little bit. And I, did all my social work stuff about how it wasn't her, it was the crossing guard, and there might have been a few reasons for it, like they were nervous or whatever. So, but I still continue to give her the homework. And like I said, it did set her back a little. And also, I just wanted to say, and I know Marianne is going to say this too, Mary Nell, thank you so much for both tutors talks. I don't know how we're going to live up to this the next few times that we do tutors talk, but what you've done both sessions is very, very helpful, and we appreciate you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I think a lot of tutors probably have successes like this. And I know when I was doing the small talk in particular, I thought, oh, this is working really well. I wish I could share this with somebody so that it isn't just mine. So I appreciate that. And I think we might have more successes out there than we know, people that are willing to share experiences or techniques.
And we would invite any of you who feel like you've had something that's worked for you that you could share with the group to approach myself or Sheila or Jack, and we will give you an opportunity to present at one of these events because it really helps bring something new in that we haven't talked about before. And I could see today that the conversation was useful for everyone. So we have one more thing, if there aren't any more questions. Joanne, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just have one comment. I just remembering that half of or more of the conversation is listening instead of talking. So it might be, some students might feel hesitant to talk because their listening skills are not really up to par. They didn't understand what the other party is saying.
Thank you.